Geeks and geekettes, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, and comic book fans of all kinds from all around the world, welcome to another edition of Ask Chuck Dixon, where you get to ask me, a working comic book professional of long standing, questions about what I do for a living and what I do for a living as I write comic books. So let's get right to those questions, and we got some good ones. Scott Stubing. What do you think about the marriage between Peter Parker and Mary Jane Watson and Marvel's various attempts to eliminate the marriage until Quesada finally did it in one more day? Is a single Spider-Man that much better than a married Spider-Man? And this question extends to Superman and Lois Lane, better married or unmarried? I'll admit, as a married man, I like reading about married superheroes. Well, I think the problem is you ran into writers who didn't know how to write a married couple, didn't know how to make it interesting, and so they undid it in the most contrived and offensive way possible. So they just sort of retconned this marriage out of existence, and it's kind of sad because Spider-Man's got a long history. And he has evolved, unlike a lot of comic book characters, he has evolved over time. He graduated high school, he went to college, graduated college. So he's, aged. Obviously, he hasn't aged, 50 years, but he's aged somewhat over the run of the comic, the long run of the comic. And him getting married just seemed like the next logical step. And the same for Superman and Lois Lane, particularly as the status quo of, the Bachelor and his longtime love interest. That worked back when the comics audience turned over every few years as the kids outgrew comics and, moved on to other things. And you had a new crop of kids coming in. So you could keep this perpetual courtship going forever, with characters like Superman and Lois Lane and The Flash and Ira West and Carol Danvers and Hal Jordan and blah, 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 on and on and on and on. So is it Carol Danvers? I'm confusing. Anyway. You'll correct me in the comments, I'm sure. Was it Carol Ferris? Boy, oh boy, I'm losing my geek cred here. So I can't remember. Anyway, with the audience turning over, you could keep the status quo of the endless courtship going. But starting in the 80s, the comic companies kind of just forgot about that turnover audience and just thought about maintaining the audience they had. A stupid business plan because your audience is going to age out. They're not going to outgrow comics. They're just going to die. So the endless courtship thing began to wear thin on readers who had been reading the comics for 10 years or more. And so you needed the characters to move on, to make some changes in their life, logical changes. And so that led to Spider-Man and Superman getting married. And yeah, I like reading about married characters as well. When I was a kid, one of the things I thought was interesting about the Elongated Man was that he was married. Ralph and Sue Dibney had an established marriage as the series began. And I think the thing I liked about it as a kid was you wouldn't have any of the stupid soap opera aspects, what I saw as stupid soap opera aspects in the other comics. Because, they're married. So there's not going to be any of this tension between the two of them. There's not going to be any of this romantic, silliness because they're an established couple. I think that's one of the reasons. I also like the stories. But I thought that was a cool approach. And of course, Reed and Sue, they were married for a long time. They got married when I was still a kid, one of the annuals. And, I was cool with that. I thought that made sense for the characters. And I really think that was the first big comic book wedding. I can't remember a comic book character getting married before that it was a big deal. So it's kind of Marvel kind of introduced those massive continuity changes, like, killing characters off, marrying characters off, whatever. But yeah, I think it's refreshing instead of the having the boy girl stuff all the time, chasing each other around, never getting anywhere. All right, first name, last name. When writing comics, which onomatopoeia, that's a word you all should look up, is best to use for the sound effect of heavy breathing of a terrified, exhausted person running away from something? I'm thinking there should be better ones to use than sigh, sigh, pant, pant, wheeze, wheeze, or huff, huff, which admittedly, I think huff, huff is the best out of the four, but that it sounds like someone exercising, more like someone exercising than someone running for his life. I used pant, myself. I remember some editors, some hipper than thou editors at DC, openly laughing at me, holding up a page in which I had a character doing just that, running away in terror and not being able to maintain his breath and panting. And they made fun of me for it. And it's like, okay, well, long story short, I'm still in the business and they're not. So who's laughing now? But yeah, I mean, what else are you going to do? The thing is, you can eschew the pant if the artist has drawn the person looking effectively exhausted. In other words, if you don't need to embellish what the artist has there. But every once in a while, a pant is good. An onomatopoeia is good if you really need, if there's an off-panel reaction or like a gasp, anything like that. And yeah, they're comic book cliches, but sound effects are a comic book cliche. So you can't avoid them. So yeah, I'm all for pant. Yeah, huff huff. I never really thought of that one. So okay. Jesse Herndon, do you recall any special reason why Green Arrow died in issue 102 instead of the milestone 100? Was there an intent behind that choice, taking the audience by surprise, or did the story just work out that way organically? I don't really recall. I know they did an enhanced cover for 100, and they probably thought, well, that's all the marketing we need to do. We're going to do this enhanced. I think it had like a silver foil effect, and we're going to do that for the cover, and that'll, the retailers eat them up. At least they did back then, and that'll be enough to sell that. So why waste Oliver Queen's death on an issue that we already know is going to sell well? So we'll just stick that in 102. Why this was done, I don't know. Why they killed Oliver Queen, I don't know. It was all editorially driven. Initially, and I've told this story before, and the setup for his death is in 100. I mean, it pays off in 101. Anyway, I've told the story before, but it bears repeating, and a lot of you haven't heard it. They came to me and said, we want to basically, you have to come up with a trap where Green Arrow loses his arm. And there was much amusement that we were going to have him lose not the arm that he had lost as portrayed in Dark Knight Returns, but the other arm. So it was basically to say Dark Knight Returns is not canon. So the real DCU, he didn't lose that arm, he lost the other arm. And so I had to come up with this trap. And they also, I have no idea, I really should have asked more questions. They said, Superman comes to rescue him from this trap and can't. And so Ollie loses his arm. And if you've read the issue, that's why there's this complex bomb on an airplane that can only be diffused by basically Ollie, reaching inside the bomb mechanism and holding down a dead man switch. I think that if I'm remembering correctly. Superman shows up, and in my initial script, the way I initially wrote it, Superman basically removes Ollie's arm using his heat vision, and then pulls Ollie from the plane and flies away as the plane explodes. And I thought that's the only thing. And it took me a week to figure this out. Not only is it a trap, traps are tough to figure out, a working trap that makes sense, and then a trap Superman can't rescue you from. It's, in other words, a thing that Superman can't accomplish. And so we did this amputation idea. I came up with this amputation idea. Superman takes his arm off, and so I get done with that. I hand it in. I'm pretty proud of it. And then they come back to me and say, Paul's changed his mind, meaning Paul Levitz. Just kill him. And I said, what? Oh, man. So the trap still worked, except Ollie refused to allow Superman to take his arm off. And Superman has to let Ollie die. A rare instance of Superman failing. So that's why that happened. Why it happened, when it happened, and in what issue, I'm not privy to that thought other than the theories I just gave you. MB, when you were writing Moon Knight, did his mental health issues play into the stories at all? I feel like these days Marvel rely too heavily on this aspect of his character. Now it seems that the multiple personality disorder is the only thing Moon Knight has going for him. No, Carl Potts was the editor, and he specifically said on Mark Spector and Moon Knight, the new comic we were doing, that he didn't want Moon Knight to have the split personality. He didn't want him to have the psychiatric disorders. He wanted him to be Mark Spector Moon Knight, only one secret identity, and we would rely a lot upon his mercenary past to build stories. And then basically he was trying to make up for the sins he had committed as a hired soldier of fortune. And I like that idea. And it came sort of a kind of a military edge. And a lot of the stories grew out organically. I mean, people from Mark Spector's past show up and all the rest of it. And it kind of fit in with the what was going on at Marvel at the time, with a lot of more street level heroes and anti-heroes like the Punisher and such. And so that was the reason for that. And hey, it's all been, they finally recollected or have collected the full run of Mark Spector Moon Knight in Omnibus, and of which I wrote over half. I was on the book for 2 years, and you might want to pick that up. I should pick one up too, because Marvel never sent me a comp. Okay, Roberto Dungato. What are some of your favorite non-superhero comics? Anything from BDs, those are French comics to you, to manga, to manhwa, I have no idea what that is, or cool rupestric paintings in Altamira, or late Republic Roman graffiti. There's a lot of comics. I probably like a lot more comics that aren't superhero than are superhero. Fox and Crow is a longtime favorite of mine. It was a long-running comic book at Marvel based on a brief run of cartoons created by Columbia Pictures at the time. And, not at the time, in the late 40s. But Fox and Crow lived on long after the cartoons were forgotten in monthly books, sometimes appearing twice a month in their own title, Fox and Crow, and in another title called Real Screen Comics, which were supposed to represent characters from the Columbia's animated line of characters. You go on YouTube, you can find some old Fox and Crow cartoons. They're pretty good. A lot of them are by guys who worked at Warner's and MGM. Frank Tashlin directed a number of them. They're good, solid 7-minute theatrical cartoons. Anyway, I like the series. Cartoonist Jim Davis worked on it for almost its entire run. I forget who wrote them. And the thing about Fox and Crow was it was about a fox who lived in a house and an annoying crow who lived in a tree out in front of his house. And that was it. That was the formula. And somehow this book ran for 15 years in monthlies. And the stories were all fun and engaging. The Crow never came up, never ran short of schemes to drive the fox crazy. And in one epic story, the Crow is stuck for an idea, and he goes through his back issues of Fox and Crow comics to see if he can reuse a gag from the past. So talk about meta. Another favorite I've talked about a lot, Uncle Scrooge, Carl Barks' classic. This is Don Rosa art, though, obviously. And Don did a great job as well. Uncle Scrooge and the Duck characters, big time favorites. I read a lot of even foreign collections by artists from the Netherlands and Italy and elsewhere. It's just a terrific comic book universe, and kind of influential as I moved into my professional comic book career. Little Lulu is another one. John Stanley was an absolute genius. Little Lulu is a classic farce. Stanley could take the most mundane, everyday event and turn it into a circus by the time the story was over. Terrific running gags, one of the most consistent universes in comics, where he would reference things and characters and events that might have happened years before and bring them back again. And running gags. I love a good running gag. And, particularly in the Tubby stories, where Tubby takes on the role of detective. They're some of my favorite comic book stories of all time. Spirou is a long-running character in Belgian comics. They're finally being published in English here, but they'll probably never republish all of them. Spirou's creators are very prolific. He continues to be published in New Adventures and new sort of Elseworldy type adventures, which still retain the feel and tone. They don't really change anything. They don't reboot anything. They just recast the characters in World War II adventures and things like that, which absolutely brilliant stuff. The artwork is always top-notch. Stories are always funny and engaging, very clever with traps and suspense and villains trying to take over the world. And they've stopped trying to explain why Spirou is always in a bellhop outfit, even though he no longer works at a hotel. just that's what he wears. Get over it. Okay. Tex. I've often talked about Tex Willer, the greatest Western comic ever, from Benelli in Italy. And some of these are being translated into English finally. So I'm getting to read some of these, actually read them as opposed to just staring at them in awe and wonder and trying to figure out what they're talking about in the long conversation pieces. But it is absolutely a favorite of mine. Vinland Saga, as far as manga goes. Yeah, I read a decent amount of manga, but Vinland Sagas, this Viking story, this multi-generational Viking story, is just freaking awesome. I have one volume left to read. I'm caught up. And I'm like holding off. It's like that last piece of candy in the box. You don't want to waste it. So I'll probably read that next couple of weeks and then give you my thoughts on it. But just good stuff. Solid manga and solid historical adventure. I never thought that a Japanese comic would so accurately portray the Viking era, but it's quite amazing. Hombre is a long-running on-again series from Spain by Jose Ortiz, Comic Master. And it's a post-apocalyptic story. There's some Western elements, some Road Warrior elements, but very down-to-earth, very reality-based post-apocalyptic story as Hombre, who's, as far as I know, that's his only name, sort of tries to survive. And you look at him, he's kind of the atypical comic book hero. He's got the receding hairline, and he's not a muscle man, and he gets himself in a lot of trouble. But he always manages to get himself out, and generally, by the time he's gotten himself out of it, there's a lot of dead people laying around. So it's good stuff, good solid sci-fi dystopic action stuff. And of course, Judge Dredd. I've talked a lot about Judge Dredd recently. I've read Dredd from the beginning, and I really dig Judge Dredd. And everything about him. I enjoy a little late Roman Republic graffiti now and then. Who doesn't? Hey, Roberto gets a twin spin. Let's get to the second question. What languages can you read, write, or speak, if I may be so bold to ask? Well, I speak English. I speak both Southern English and Northern English. And that's about it. I know some phrases in a lot of other languages, but probably not enough to order dinner. I'm one of those, monolingual Americans. I'm sorry. I took German for 4 years in school, and I can only remember a few sentences from the workbook, and none of them are useful. So there you go. Although I'm told my pronunciation is very good. So, Brett Cherubini. I read your ending to the 90s Marvel Punisher series. I thought it was very good. It left me feeling some type of way about Punisher. What made you decide to end the series the way you did? What is the psyche behind Micro? We were introduced to this contrast between the two characters in the start of Warzone. Was the series ending something that you would imagine from the start due to the differences between Micro and Punisher? Is Punisher capable of killing his only friend? Yeah, I mean, I took my cue from a Mike Baron story in which Punisher had a knotty problem that he couldn't solve himself, and he turned to all these helpers he had, Micro and a few other people. And as he went from one to the other, saying, I need your help with this, blah, 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 and they failed to provide him with his answers or whatever it was he needed. And in each instance said, well, then what good are you to me? And I thought, whoa, this like peels away a layer of Frank Castle I never really considered, and really opened my eyes to what this character is about. He's all about his mission. He doesn't care about anybody around him. He doesn't have any friends. Micro was never a friend. Micro was useful. Now, Micro was a friend to him, but Frank Castle was never a friend to Micro. I mean, Frank Castle's responsible for the death of Micro's son. I mean, Micro gets really put through a lot of shit by Frank Castle and never gets an apology, never gets a moment's appreciation. Doesn't get a vacation, doesn't get any perks or benefits or bonuses. Frank expects him to be there to answer the phone or open the door whenever Frank shows up, to be rearmed or patched up or get information on Punisher's next target. So I read that story and I realized that these two have a very fragile relationship that has to end someday. Like we talked about the marriages, these characters fall in love in the comics and they're in love for decades. So it's inevitable. They've got to get married. They got to bring some closure to this relationship. Same thing for Frank and Micro. That relationship had to end sometime. Either Micro would just get sick of it and walk away, which he was never going to do. He was always the faithful friend, the faithful retainer, the squire to Frank Castle. Or Frank was going to put him in a situation where Micro got killed, even using him as bait, which he did a number of times. Or Frank would kill him himself because he didn't trust him. And so over my entire run on the Punisher, I sort of set this up in the background that Micro was disposable. In Frank's mind, Micro is disposable. And then as Micro more and more tried to, quote unquote, help Frank, the more Frank resented Micro and finally decides that Micro is not, he's not on my side. And all Micro was trying to do was save Frank from himself, but Frank wasn't having it. And so, he's perfectly capable of killing Micro. Joshua Ignatowski, when writing stories with lots of eye candy action set pieces, have you most often found yourself coming up with the action scenes first and building the rest of the story around them, or have you more often come up with other elements of the story first and then added the action into it, which you'd already written? No, I think the action in a comic story is like the music in a musical comedy. In a musical comedy, the story does not stop for the music. It's not a break from the story. The music carries the story. This became apparent to me when they began running Abbott and Costello movies on TV. And they always cut the comedy scenes. They always cut out the who's on first scenes, but they kept the musical scenes in the early Abbott Costellos. And I finally got to ask a guy who did the film editing at a TV station, why did they do that? Why did they cut out the comedy scenes but leave the musical scenes? And he said, because the musical scenes carry the story. The comedy scenes don't. The comedy scenes are actually, the repartee between Bud and Lou was actually an interruption to the story. The story stops dead while these two, have their little wordplay or their little argument. So action is part of it. I think of the story and the action at the same time, or as you said, I think of the big scene, this big action scene, my hero versus, 19 ninjas on top of a dam that's about to burst. Okay, how do I get in there? How does that make sense? How does that resolve itself? That's my big scene. That's what I'm getting to. But otherwise, I come up with my suspense situation, my opening. You generally always open on action. And then how do I carry the story forward without having page after page of explanation? Page after page of everyone having lunch and talking about their feelings. No, I want to show you, I want you to learn about the story, and I want you to learn about the character by what he does, by what he or she does. And that's how you learn about them. And you learn, and you do this through action. And every comic book story, generally, in my mind, needs 3 pieces of action. Now, one of those pieces of action could be the lead character skateboarding somewhere, or skiing, or just leaping rooftop to rooftop. It doesn't need to be violent confrontation every time. But you need these characters in motion. It's comics. You don't want the characters static and just talking. If they're talking, they should be moving. If they're talking, they should be doing something. And if they're in action, they're not talking, because the action's telling you all you need to know about them, all you need to know about what's going on. So, you can't separate the two. I think of a story, I think of the action simultaneously. What story would best fit this action, or what actions would best fit this story? And then it all comes together organically. The artwork I've shown you here to demonstrate comic book action is by Adamir Leal from the new Midnight's War Night Streets spinoff that I'm doing for Arctoons. So you'll be able to see that soon on Arctoons in full blazing color. All right. Hey, Mr. Ignatowski gets a twin spin. What's something about Graham Nolan that makes him a good friend to have? Well, Graham is, he's one of those rare individuals who will always tell you exactly what's on his mind. He is willing to share his opinion. When he's not willing to share his opinion, there's trouble. So if you want a unvarnished criticism or opinion on something, you call Graham. If you don't want to hear the brutal truth, don't call Graham. Call your mom. That's one of the things that makes him a good friend. I think to be a good friend, you've got to be honest. It's like when someone shows me something, a piece of writing or a piece of art, and I tell them it's really good. I really like it. And they're like, well, you're not just telling me that, are you? And I says, well, what kind of a friend would just tell you what you want to hear? No, you came to me and showed me this because you wanted my honest opinion, and you would trust my honest opinion. And I'm not going to be highly critical out of envy or malice or anything else, because we're friends. But I'm going to make sure you know when you're going wrong. And Graham will always let you know when you're going wrong. And I always call him Never Back Down Nolan, because he's also a good guy to have at your back in any kind of fight, be it in an alley, which has never happened with the two of us, or in a courtroom, which has. So, we're involved in a business venture right now, Spin Rack. And, we're with, initially we were with people we didn't know. They were from different fields and things like that. When you're in that room, you don't know who to trust. And now it's not the same. We've been working together now for like a year and a half, and we all have each other's backs. But at that time, it was, me and Graham, the two comic book guys, against these, heavy hitters from corporate, finance, entertainment, tech. And, we were in over our heads for a while, and we really relied on one another. We were a voting block of two. If you asked me what I thought and asked Graham what he thought, we thought the same thing. But other than that, he's a fun guy to hang out with, a fun guy to talk to. And, of course, he's just a freaking incredible artist. And, we like a lot of the same stuff. And, we've known each other forever. I met Graham, he looked like he was 16. I know he wasn't. But I met Graham at the very, very beginning of both of our comic book careers, really. We were both just getting into the business. Him as a young artist with a head full of dreams, and me as a crusty 32-year-old, basically taking my last stab at the comic book industry before giving it up. Just driving an ice cream truck for the rest of my life or something, working behind the counter at 7-Eleven. So anyway, we met each other at a time when both of us were hungry and striving. And I look forward to working with him all the time. He's obviously one of my most frequent collaborators, and will be so for the foreseeable future. Oh, Ignatowski gets a triple spin. As someone who grew up in New England, what's your preferred kind of pizza? And is there any place in Florida other than the one in St. Augustine that serves pizza that's decent? Papa John's, Little Caesars, etc. don't count. Of course they don't count. That's not pizza. That's not pizza. You can't get pizza from a chain. Well, not a big national chain anyway. New York style pizza is my favorite. I grew up in Philly, but Philly, it was New York style pizza. Neapolitan pizza is what we called it down there. It's not that deep dish stuff they serve in Chicago, that mess that's like impossible to eat. You can't take a deep dish chunk of pizza, fold it in half, and stick it in your pie hole. You can with a Neapolitan. It's a wedge. You just fold it in half, and man, you can walk down the street eating a New York style slice of pizza. It's the best way to eat a New York style slice of pizza is walking down the street. Now, can you get a decent pizza in Florida? Yeah, there's a few places, but my favorite is West Shore. I don't know. I think they're just in the Tampa Bay area. They got maybe 10 stores, and it's consistent. The quality is consistent. And the secret is in the crust. I mean, the cheese, the pepperoni, that's going to be the same wherever you go. But the secret's in the crust. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, one of the guys there told me that they actually have water shipped down from up north. If you're making soft pretzels, or you're making pizza crust, or you're making hoagie rolls, you got to have that water from like the Northeast, from Pennsylvania, from New York, from New England. Whatever's in that water, and my wife could probably tell you because she's like a cooking genius. Whatever's in that water makes that crust. And I know for a fact that, thank God they opened, Wawa opened in Florida. We got Wawas all over the place down here. And Wawa was the, I can get a hoagie now. I can get a decent Philadelphia hoagie made with decent Amoroso bread. Because the secret to a good hoagie is bread. If you think Subway has hoagies, you're wrong. That whatever the hell that bread is, it ain't hoagie rolls. You need a crusty hoagie roll to make a good hoagie. And thank God Wawa provides for ex-Philadelphia folks like me. And there's a ton of us down here in Tampa. So, wow, that went way off on a tangent from comics. Tim Gilpin, a while back you shared the story of the huge checks you and Flynn Henry received for Law Dog #1, followed by the paltry payments for the second issue. Your story demonstrated the crazy state of comics in the 90s. As a fan, I could see the bubble would burst. Did people inside the industry see the coming bust or hope for a soft landing Well, if you know anything about anything, if you know anything about fads, particularly fads that involve young folks, they end quickly. They end with a bang. It's like one day half the shows on TV are Westerns. The next day there's spy shows. The next day there's something else. I've seen Beatlemania, Batmania, Davy Crockett mania. I've seen every kind of mania when I was a kid. And when they were over, they were over. And they ended overnight. And if you're in the comic book industry, you're kind of anticipating that this incredible ride that we were all on with the big sales, the huge royalty checks, and the big, gigantic lines at conventions, that it would all end someday. But I don't think anybody thought it would end as quickly as it did. And by quickly, I don't mean abruptly. I mean, this golden era was pretty short. It was only a few years where comics were like really hip and cool, and our sales were, I mean, I worked on comics that sold in the millions. There were a lot of reasons why it came apart. I mean, it came apart like immediately. It came apart like 1 month we're going gangbusters. The next month it's like no. And I talked to retailers and they saw this too. 1 month gangbusters. Everybody wants comics. Kids are showing up. Everybody's buying comics. Next month, stores at ghost town. Nobody's showing up. It's like the comic book reading public at that time simply decided, we've had it with this. We're not doing this anymore. We're going to do something else. What that something else was, what really caused it, I don't know. But I think it was inevitable because, you had this explosion with Image and these superstar comic book artists. They made this huge money at Marvel, took those millions of dollars that they made in royalties, created their own comic book company, and basically blew up in the direct market. This is when the direct market really exploded. And the comic book companies abandoned the newsstand. They just fled from the newsstand and concentrated on this great new gold mine of a market, and which turned out to be a dry hole after a while. And the problem was that everybody was taking advantage with enhanced covers and variant covers and all the rest. And they weren't concentrating on the material inside the comics. You had a bunch of people creating derivative characters. They were derivative of what was going on at Marvel and DC. Image in particular, they didn't hire professional comic book writers. They didn't like professional comic book writers. They thought somehow the art was the only driving force you needed. If you had a comic book full of a lot of eye candy, that's what the readers wanted. Well, maybe initially, yeah. I mean, if you're, between 10 and 14 and you see this really awesome artwork and you're thrilled by it, yeah, you're going to respond to that in a big way. But over time, it's going to wear thin if the stories aren't good, if the characters and situations aren't there to bring you back over and over again. If you reach a point where you just don't even care about these characters anymore, no matter how cool they look, that's a recipe for trouble. And I think that's what happened. I think you ended up with a glut of books that were just totally forgettable. You had Acclaim and Image just pumping stuff out. And eventually they reached a point where nobody wanted it anymore. And consequently, then no one wanted Marvel or DC anymore. And they went back to the well once too often with the variant covers and, special effects covers and, all the rest of it, multiple number ones. And they didn't think about any kind of long term, which is a shame because, Tom DeFalco said to me once, he said that Marvel is so profitable, we're making so much money, we can afford to take chances, which is exactly what you want to hear. He was smart. He says that we can take chances and create comics that reach out to new audiences. And he tried a couple of experiments, most of which, failed for one reason or another, but he was making an honest effort to move Marvel away from its usual reader base and find a new reader base. And at least Tom was thinking ahead, thinking about the health of the industry. Everybody else was thinking about how much money they could make right now. And they didn't seem to care if the wheels came off. They were just going to, put that pedal to the metal and just keep going for as long as the cash was coming in. To the point where it just got cynical. I mean, at one point, one creator was soliciting for books in Diamond and then looking at the sales, the orders. And he wasn't, normally when you solicit a number one and it appears in previews, the next two issues, the first three issues of that comic are completed. They're in the basket. Well, this creator wouldn't start work on issue one until he saw the orders. And if the orders weren't high enough, he just canceled it and didn't do any work on it. And that's cynical. That's like, no, that's not how comics work. That's not healthy for a long run. That's not healthy for the medium as a whole. And everybody paid the price for that, from fans who speculated to retailers to your friendly neighborhood comic book writer who, all of a sudden, those big royalty checks dried up. They weren't coming in anymore. Whereas before, and I mean it dried up almost entirely. I mean, you were on a book that had royalties, and then all of a sudden it wasn't paying any royalties. And I broke in at a time in the 80s when almost every comic paid some degree of royalties. I mean, Savage Sword of Conan, even though it didn't sell much in the comic shops, did well on the newsstand, and it was a reliable royalty payer. It doubled my pay or more on every issue with the royalty checks that came. But once everything fell apart after the early 90s gold rush, royalties were, big royalty checks were a thing of the past. And even medium, modest royalty checks went away for a lot of books because sales just cratered all across the line. And that's the history of the 90s. Sad. I really think it could have gone on a few more years if there was more attention paid to the quality of the books themselves. Working to engage the readers. Okay, this is Geronimo. This is Larry's cat. He sent me a picture. I don't know that this cat, Geronimo is the absolute perfect name for this cat. I don't know how you feel about that, but I just think that cat looks like he should be named Geronimo. He looks very, very serious, just like Geronimo. Okay, I can't let us go by without talking about John Romita Sr. He passed away a couple weeks ago, and at 93, had a great life. Terrific, family guy, terrific dad, longtime editor, art director at Marvel. Extraordinarily influential guy, one of the pillars of the Marvel Age of Comics. Of course, he's known as one of the premier Spider-Man artists. My favorite, though, is his short run on Captain America and the Falcon. There was this one summer where it was this extended storyline about Hydra and the gray gargoyle and all, and it was him and sometimes Gil Kane with Romita inks. And I just really I adored this run. Just a terrific action-packed Captain America thriller. And the thing about Romita, I mean, I don't know how much you know or don't know about Romita. If you don't know much, you're going to learn more right now. He was a perfectionist in a business that doesn't always appreciate perfectionists. He always wanted to put his best art forward. This was a guy, even though he was a consummate professional, popular, a fan favorite, still struggled. Still, there's no ego. This guy had no ego. He thought, I'm always learning. And then the best artists are always learning, best writers as well. And he often struggled with deadlines because of this perfectionism, because he wanted to put his best, if his name was going on it, he wanted to be the best work he could do. He didn't like shortcuts. He didn't like cutting corners. And if you're familiar with his work, you can see it. This guy never phoned it in. Never phoned it in. So the monthly pressures, and if you look at his history across long runs like Spider-Man, things like that, you'll see a lot of fill-in issues. And it's because he needed help. He wasn't willing to take the shortcuts needed all the time to meet a monthly schedule, because a monthly comic book schedule can be grueling if you're not built that way. And he, it's not to say he wasn't a great artist. John was a great artist, but he probably wasn't built for that monthly grind, and it ground him down. And eventually, he stopped doing regular comics and became Marvel's art director. He ran Romita's Raiders out of the bullpen. He was the guy responsible for getting comics out on time. I saw these people working in the Marvel bullpen, and what they did to get an issue to the printer on time was just amazing. This is Herculean effort. You would think you're never going to get all this together in time. You've only got 30 minutes, and they do it because Romita trained them and taught them and oversaw them, but always in a gentle way. This is one of the sweetest guys you'd ever want to meet. And but the thing is, the irony is when he became art director, he did more drawing than he ever did as a freelance artist. I mean, he was doing covers and corrections. I have some pencil tracings he did over another artist to do corrections, and he was doing that all day long. Anybody who worked in the bullpen or worked at Marvel Time can tell you that. John Romita was at the drawing board all day long, drawing, redrawing, fixing, patches, all the rest of it. So I think maybe he's one of those people that the deadline intimidated him. And he loved to draw, and he was really good at drawing, but he didn't like that idea that, I've got to do all this by this date. But if you came to him and says, we need this cover, re-inked like as fast as you can, he could do it, and it would look awesome. So, it's funny, it's funny it worked out that way. But thank God he was there, at Marvel through all those years to help maintain that house look. Now, personal funny story. I mean, I was a writer, so I didn't have a lot of interplay with the art director. But I'll tell you a funny story. I was at a convention, and I gave John Romita Jr., John's also awesomely talented son, I gave him my sketchbook, and he didn't have time to draw in it, so he said, "Let me take it home." That's always a mistake. Not just with Johnny Romita Jr., but with any artist. And I said, "Okay, yeah, I really want to sketch," because we'd worked on Punisher together. And so I said, "Okay, you can take it home." Well, I didn't see the sketchbook again for years. And I wasn't going to call and pester the guy. He's going to do a free sketch for me. I'm not going to be a pain in the ass. Where's my sketch, Johnny? So years go by. And I'm walking through the lobby at this hotel at San Diego Con, and Johnny Romita Jr. is walking the other way. And, "Hey, how you doing?" Shake hands, catch up a little bit. And he says, "How'd you like that sketch?" I said, "What sketch?" "The one I did in your sketchbook." I said, "I never got it." He's like, "What?" So I never got it. But I sent it to you. "No, Johnny, I never got that sketchbook." And I said, "But don't feel bad. I mean, don't feel bad." And then his dad walks up. He said, "What's going on?" And somehow he knew me, remembered me. Like I said, I didn't have a lot of, business with Johnny. I saw him a lot at the Marvel offices, but I didn't think he ever remembered me. And he comes up and he goes, "Hi, Chuck, what's going on? What are you guys talking about?" So his son explains it to him. Basically, I lost Chuck's sketchbook. And John Romita, who I never saw give a crossword to anybody, he gets a little peeved at his boy. "How can you do that? How can you lose Chuck's sketchbook? We're in the middle of the lobby, a hotel. How can you lose his sketchbook? That's so careless of you. That's so neglectful." And he's giving Johnny shit. And I'm between the two of them going, no, it's okay. It's just a sketchbook. It's no big deal. It's okay. It's fine. Right? And Johnny promises he's going to look into it. End of the story was 2 years later, sketchbook shows up in a FedEx package from the Marvel offices. They found it behind a desk when they were moving from one office to another. And I'm very grateful. They mailed it to me. But the best thing about it, even if I never saw the sketchbook again, was that moment of father and son having a little bit of a disagreement in the hotel lobby at the Marriott in San Diego. That's a precious memory to me. And I couldn't help but think about it when I heard about the great man's passing. So Godspeed to you, the legendary Jazzy Johnny Romita. Thanks for all the comics. BrunoBookstore, gmail.com if you want to reach me. Questions, pictures of your kitty cats, no matter what their name is. Dogs, suggestions, things you think I might want to read. BrunoBookstore, gmail.com is the most reliable way to get a hold of me. And check out SpinRack, spinrack.io. We just launched our first mobile game, Comics Chaos, featuring the characters from Joe Frankenstein. Soon to feature the comics from My Sister Suprema and Law Dog as well. Or you can visit us at Discord if you don't use Discord. And it's a great way. I mean, people are submitting stories and pencil artwork and layout artwork and ink artwork. And Graham and I look at it all and critique and give you advice and everything else. So if you're a wannabe artist or you just want to talk to some comic book creators directly, go to Discord, to the SpinRack pages, and we're there waiting for you. So SpinRack, new multimedia comic book company based, comic book, digital, gaming, all based on intellectual property created by me and Graham Nolan, and soon to be other creators. Anyway, that's it for me for this week. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Thanks for liking and subscribing and all the other wonderful things you do. And especially thanks for these awesome questions. A great crop this week. It's a great crop every week. You're a good crowd. And I'll see you all down the road.